Have you ever wondered how the Chinese Revolution of 1949 shaped India's foreign policy? Picture a world emerging from the ravages of the Second World War. The global narrative is shifting, and in the heart of Asia, a significant transformation is about to take place. The year is 1949, and China is on the brink of a revolution that will not only change its own course, but will also have far-reaching implications for its neighbors, particularly India. The Chinese Revolution, a critical juncture in world history, was not an overnight event. It was the culmination of years of unrest, economic strife, and political upheaval. The rule of the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party of China, was being challenged by a new, rising power, the Communist Party of China, led by Mao Zedong. The stage was set for a clash of ideologies, a struggle for power that would ultimately lead to the establishment of the People's Republic of China. The revolution was characterized by its relentless drive towards modernization and the creation of a new social order. It aimed to eradicate feudalism, reduce foreign influence, and establish a socialist economic system. More importantly, it sought to unify China under one banner, one ideology, and one leadership. The events leading up to the revolution were marked by a series of civil wars, known collectively as the Chinese Civil War. The Communists and the Nationalists engaged in a fierce and bloody battle for control over China's destiny. This war was not just about power, it was about defining China's identity in a rapidly changing world. In October 1949, the Communist Party, having gained the upper hand in the Civil War, proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. This marked the end of the Chinese Civil War and the beginning of a new era. The impact of this revolution echoed far beyond China's borders, influencing the geopolitical dynamics of the region and altering the course of India's foreign policy. The Chinese Revolution was a turning point, not just for China, but also for its neighboring countries, particularly India. So, how did India, a major neighbor and emerging power, react to these political changes in China? With the dawn of the Chinese Revolution, India found itself in a unique position. As a newly independent nation, India was trying to navigate its own path on the international stage, and the rise of a communist China added a new dimension to its foreign policy considerations. In the immediate aftermath of the Chinese Revolution, India's reactions were characterized by a blend of apprehension and optimism. There was a certain sense of unease about the rise of a powerful communist neighbor. The memory of the Bolshevik Revolution and its global reverberations was still fresh, and there were concerns about how China's political shift might influence the larger geopolitical landscape. However, alongside these apprehensions, there was also a sense of optimism. India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, believed in the potential for peaceful coexistence with China. Nehru's vision of Asian solidarity and his belief in the principle of Panchshil, or the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, formed the bedrock of India's approach towards China. In 1954, India and China signed the Panchshil Agreement, which was seen as a cornerstone of India-China relations. The agreement, based on the principles of mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence, was hailed as a diplomatic triumph. It seemed to signal a new era of friendly relations between the two Asian giants. Yet, beneath the surface, there were undercurrents of tension. Border disputes and ideological differences continued to simmer, and the optimism of the early years gradually gave way to realism. The complexities of the India-China relationship were slowly beginning to unfold. So how did India's initial reactions were a mix of apprehension and optimism, setting the stage for a complex relationship. The Chinese Revolution of 1949 and its aftermath proved to be a defining moment in shaping India's foreign policy, marking the beginning of a journey filled with diplomatic challenges and strategic recalibrations. But what happens when expectations meet reality? The Sino-Indian War of 1962 gives us some answers. As the 1950s rolled on, India and China were seen as two Asian giants growing together in the post-colonial world. However, beneath the surface, tensions were simmering. Disputes over the border, particularly along the McMahon Line in the eastern sector and the Aksai Chin region in the west, led to a full-blown conflict in 1962. This was the Sino-Indian War. The war was brief but brutal, lasting just over a month. It ended with China declaring a unilateral ceasefire, but not before it had inflicted heavy casualties on the Indian side and gained control over significant territories. This was a shock for India, which had until then been pursuing a policy of peaceful coexistence, as encapsulated in Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's Panchsheel principles. The aftermath of the war was a time of introspection for India. It had to come to terms with not just the military defeat, but also the failure of its China policy. The war had exposed the limitations of Nehru's idealistic approach to international relations, leading to a re-evaluation of India's foreign policy. India's approach towards China and the broader international community underwent a significant shift. There was a newfound emphasis on realism and national security. India began to invest more heavily in its defense capabilities and started to cultivate strategic relationships with other countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union. The war also had a profound impact on Sino-Indian relations. Trust was broken, and a sense of suspicion and rivalry replaced the earlier spirit of friendship. The war left a border dispute that remains unresolved to this day and continues to be a source of tension between the two countries. The Sino-Indian War was a wake-up call, leading to a strategic shift in India's foreign policy. So how did India's foreign policy change in the wake of the Sino-Indian War? It's a question that opens up a fascinating chapter in India's diplomatic history. The shock of the war in 1962 led to a major shift in India's foreign policy. Until then, the country had been operating on the principles of idealism, non-alignment, and peaceful coexistence. But the war made it clear that these principles were not enough to protect India's interests on the global stage. This realization sparked a move away from idealism toward a more pragmatic approach. It was a shift from a largely moralistic stance to one that was more realistic. The focus was now on security and strategic interests, and India began to invest heavily in its defense infrastructure. It was a change that was not just about military strength, but also about diplomatic maneuvering and economic strategy. India also began to reassess its relations with other countries. The country's policy of non-alignment, which had been a cornerstone of its foreign policy, came under scrutiny. There was a growing realization that India could not afford to stay aloof in a world that was increasingly becoming polarized. It had to engage more actively with both the Western and Eastern blocs. The war had exposed the limitations of India's policy of peaceful coexistence with China. This led to a re-evaluation of India's stance toward its powerful neighbor. India began to adopt a more cautious approach toward China, one that was characterized by vigilance and preparedness. The post-war period also saw a greater emphasis on South-South cooperation. India began to foster closer ties with other developing countries, particularly in Africa and Latin America. This was part of a strategy to counterbalance the influence of the major powers and to carve out a more independent role for India on the world stage. In conclusion, the war with China in 1962 marked a turning point in India's foreign policy. It was a period of significant change, with a shift from idealism to realism, from non-alignment to active engagement, and from peaceful coexistence to strategic vigilance. The post-war period was a time of introspection and recalibration in India's foreign policy. Fast forward to today, what are the implications of these historical events on the current India-China relations? As we find ourselves in the present day, the echoes of history reverberate in the corridors of diplomacy between India and China. The relationship between these two Asian giants is a complex tapestry woven with threads of past events, particularly the Chinese Revolution of 1949 and the resulting foreign policy shifts. The Chinese Revolution has indelibly imprinted itself on the collective memory of both nations, shaping their interactions in significant ways. The war and its aftermath have left deep scars, fostering a climate of mutual mistrust and caution that permeates their bilateral relations. Today, these two nations stand as two of the world's most populous and fastest-growing economies. Yet, their relationship is marked by a careful dance of cooperation and competition. The economic interdependence between India and China is significant, with both nations recognizing the immense potential of bilateral trade and investment. However, the shadow of history looms large, with contentious issues such as border disputes and strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific region acting as potential flashpoints. The legacy of the Chinese Revolution has also influenced India's approach towards its wider foreign policy. India has learned the hard way that maintaining a delicate balance of power is crucial in the international arena. It continues to seek a fine balance between aligning with global powers and maintaining its strategic autonomy, a strategy that has its roots in the lessons learned from its interactions with China. Moreover, the past continues to shape the future. As India and China navigate the complexities of the 21st century, their shared history serves as a constant reminder of the need for peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, and understanding. The historical events of the past century, particularly the Chinese Revolution, continue to inform the trajectory of their bilateral relationship. The Chinese Revolution of 1949 and its aftermath continue to cast a long shadow over India-China relations, reminding us of the enduring impact of historical events on international relations.